Many African countries have been struck by what has come to be known as the resource curse, with oil or mineral wealth fueling conflict instead of funding development. A report by the Southern African Resources Watch has prompted debate on the subject. Joining us now to discuss how mining can impact local communities is Dr Deprose Muchena, Deputy Director of Open Society Institute of Southern Africa. Thanks for coming through. When you talk resource in Southern Africa, particularly given the context of colonialism and the issues that we've seen with the development of the African states and consistent borders, etc., and all those things, immediately you begin talking about exploitation and all those kind of things. And yet, the two surely should not be mutually exclusive. You can develop your resources while at the same time developing your communities, while at the same time taking advantage of the technology that has been developed by more developed countries around the globe. Why is it such a problem in Southern Africa?
Yeah, you raise an interesting question for development practitioners, for governments, and for private sector. Part of the problem is the model of development that has been adopted by Southern African countries, which tends to see natural resource enclaves as centers that are not part of the national economy.
Right.
You know, they exist in their own world, use their own rules. The contract agreements that they go with the states are not known by ordinary people. Environmental assessment impact reports are also not shared by communities.
Right.
That model of development has tended to create a conflict between resource providers and resource beneficiaries. And that is exactly what we are seeing in Mozambique. A case of natural resources, a resource-rich economy, which has become the fastest growing economy in the world, in the region, beginning to show underdevelopment tenets. And I think we need to discuss that.
Whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the governments? Is it the fault of the communities? After all, people say, you know, you get the leaders that you deserve. Is it the fault of the companies that come and exploit the resources?
Well, I don't think that we can engage in a fault-finding exercise.
We have to, if we're going to fix the problem.
Okay, I think it can be an important part of the discussion. But I think a further important issue to look at is that natural resources that are extracted from Southern African countries are infinite. They come to an end. So it's important to use them sustainably. So you exploit them for present generations, but with an eye on future generations.
No, for sure.
So I think we need principles, policies, and legislative instruments that can protect and provide for the generations that are there today and provide also for generations for tomorrow.
Right.
If we do that through national economic planning, then we're able to move away from fault finding to talking about how the beneficiation is taking place.
Okay, you're trying to find a solution. So let's give someone some responsibility. Who should be doing this? Is this the work of the government? Again, I'll go through those other players, or the private sector itself that's coming to exploit, or the communities themselves, or indeed people like yourselves.
It is the work of all those three parties.
Right.
First and foremost, we need a developmental state in these countries. Do we need to have a developmental state, and we don't have.
Okay.
And a developmental
That's
state
a
is a planning
all
organization.
on its own, eh?
Of course. And I think a developmental state is a planning state that take into account communities, that take into account private sector actors, and into account itself as an actor. That's what we need. The second is we need a purposive private sector, which is accountable to communities in which they extract resources, but also accountable to the state. And then we need communities that are able to initiate dialogue and negotiate with those that are mining in their areas, so that they are shareholders to the benefits that come from the mines.
I want to pick on the private sector that's responsive to the community. Where do you find that kind of private sector? Because the companies that we see operating around the world think about the bottom line. In fact, you know, behind us is our video wall, very beautiful video wall here, where we put up the share prices of companies.
That's correct.
And the guys who invest in those companies, they want a return today. They are not looking for a return next week, next year.
Yeah, you can have a beautiful return on your investment, but also still not exploiting the people that you are extracting resources from. There is nothing that says benefit for shareholders must come at the expense of people in the manner we are seeing in some of these countries. So I think that some of these companies in their home states, they behave very honorably. They don't exploit workers in those countries. They've
How
got
do we
programs.
make these companies our own
there are a number
when
of
they are
ways.
operating within us?
Yeah, we have to set the policy right.
Right.
Yeah, we have
it's the fault of government.
It's the fault of government. They have to come with
someone to blame.
No, the government has to set the policy right. Okay, they cannot sell resources as if they are the only ones who are benefiting from selling. Those who are buying are also benefiting.
Sure.
So I think we start with that. And secondly, we need to capacitate communities to become shareholders in the projects that are taking place.
They need to be consulted. Come from the communities themselves? Because when we capacitate communities, we are bringing in ideas into them. That's the sense that I'm getting.
Okay. No, I think that you are looking at a number of factors. There is a role for agency by civic organizations, by states themselves, government departments, and the private sector. They can capacitate communities, but on their own communities, as they are showing in Mozambique, they have already capacity themselves. That's why some of them are resisting from being moved from one area to the other without promises that are written on paper and without benefits that are visible to their communities.
Sure.
So they already have innate capacity. I think they just need to be respected for what they're saying.
Is this a Southern African case?
This is not a Southern African case. I think across the continent we are seeing areas where there is oil extraction, copper extraction, gold, bauxite, and other precious minerals, a conflict between private actors and communities who own the fields in which, the soil in which the resources are being extracted.
Yeah.
In other parts of the world, in Asia and in Europe, that debate and that conflict has been resolved through policy, through law, and through punitive measures for any exploitation that takes place on the environment. And
why are we not simply going to Europe and copying the models that have been developed there and coming and imposing them here? You know, it's a benevolent dictatorship.
Well, it's not about really copying what Europe has done. It's about evolving our own development paradigms that work for us.
But it will take forever.
In
the meantime, we've got conflict across Africa, we've got conflict in Nigeria, we've got conflict in Somalia.
These conflicts are a result of not being responsive to the needs on the ground. And I think the issue is not about looking to Europe, it's about looking to Africa and the solutions that are coming from within Africa.
But there's no harm in finding lessons where
of course,
such lessons
we live
exist.
in a globalized world, and we can embrace an idea that has worked in one part of the world.
Sure.
But in the case of Africa, we need to make sure that the proceeds of economic growth are directed into communities for poverty reduction and employment creation.
Yeah.
And companies that mine resources should not be celebrated for building a small community clinic and a small football team that they support, but they should actually be providing a corporate social responsibility agenda that provides sustainable development, a proper infrastructural development plan, a proper revenue sharing, and proper training of communities for them to be able to provide for the needs of that community sustainably. And in the case of Mozambique, for Vale and Rio Tinto, the case that we looked at, we don't see that. We don't see the procurement of goods and services being contracted to local communities and companies. We see importation of products. And that undermines the capacity of that community to adopt and adapt to the mining framework.
And that certainly needs to be looked at. I think at the beginning I said I was looking for someone to blame. I found them. It's the government. It's the companies. Communities must, of course, arm themselves and try and get as active as possible.
Correct.